Okay, here we go. So can you introduce yourself for my listeners who've never heard of you?
So I'm a criminal that's not in jail is like sort of my whole thing. Like Anna Delvey, Elizabeth Holmes, Billy McFarland. Like what makes me different from them is I didn't get caught and I'm out here in the real world. No, I'm making jokes about the most recent thing that I went viral for was being a scammer, and before that it was for being a fairy tale. So I've had uh, many lives on the internet, and the current one now is sort of like downtown anti-hero. I think scammer is sort of my most previous chapter, but I'm really just a deeply, extremely online person um, who's very bougie, very openly elitist, boarding school, Cambridge University in England, studied art history, and now I make paintings and I have an OnlyFans, and I'm just generally the patron saint of chaotic good.
Well, welcome to the show,
Thank you.
and thanks for coming on today. I kind of
Yeah,
want
thanks for
to
having me.
walk it back. So will you tell me a little bit about like where you're from, what your upbringing was like, what was like baby
Yes.
Caroline like?
So I'm from Falls Church, Virginia, which is like if anyone who's listening has ever seen Parks and Recreation, it's very much like people think of the suburbs of DC as being these places with sweeping green lawns and white patrician columns and azalea bushes the color of Valentine's. And they're right. Those places very much exist for the politicians and their dogs and their wives and children to live in, but I lived in like the place where like all the Starbuckses and like the Blockbusters and the Borders and Barnes and Nobles were like next to those suburbs. Sort of on Parks and Rec, I would live in Pawnee next to the surrounding Eagletons. And I really hated it. It was so boring. I always wanted to be famous. I always wanted to be a famous writer, a famous memoir, even more specifically, memoirist. And w- I love Falls Church, but very much when people are like, "So, describe yourself," I'm never like Falls Church girl right
Yeah,
here, you
yeah.
know. Like I left and never looked back.
Do you keep in touch with anyone from your hometown?
Oh no, I grew. One of the reasons I'm actually like so friendly and warm is I my first claim to fame was I was the youngest person in the history of the world to have both kneecaps surgically removed. I was born with this extremely rare, like 1 in 7 billion congenital defect. Your kneecaps are the only bone in your body that you're not born with. They develop into cartilage when you're a toddler and then ossify into bone around puberty. And for whatever fucking reason, my personal genetic DNA code told my cells to make those little discs of cartilage when I was a toddler and then just stop. They were like, we're done. That to just keep those toddler-sized discs of cartilage. So I had to have both kneecaps removed, and it was such an invasive surgery that I had to do like one leg at a time. So what I'm getting at is that I was the girl on crutches slash a wheelchair, and at one point, I kid you fucking not, an actual old person walker with like like pierced tennis balls on
And
the end
that's
of
how
it. So
you
like
learn to walk?
no, that's how I learned to be nice to people, because when you're like, "Do you keep in touch with anyone from Falls Church?" It's like, "No. No one wanted to talk to me in school because I was literally like I also had braces for 6 years, and I just like was so deeply and on top of that, I'm such a chaotic weirdo. So like you can imagine how well I did not fit in my parents sent me to a really nice private school that was 45 minutes away from my house, but in those nice sort of Eagleton politician suburbs of DC. And yeah, I did not fit in with those kids at all. And but yeah, I not only relearned how to walk, but I learned how to be very empathetic. So all for the
Yeah.
best.
Yeah, all for
And
the
now I
best.
have knees that look like no one else's.
You have those unique needs. So when did
Yes, they're
you
very. squishy.
You moved to New York originally, so will you talk a little bit about that?
So one of the best things about me is that I'm deeply persistent. And after boarding school, I really wanted to go to Cambridge, but Cambridge did not want me to go there. They were like, we'll pass on this. Um, and so I took a gap year and applied again. And again, Cambridge was like, it's a no from us, dog. And so then I had to start going to college because I didn't know what else to do with my life. Instagram hadn't been invented yet. Like I just had to start school, but I still wanted to go to Cambridge. So I started at NYU, and for the first year, I just sort of like was Hermione Granger without the time turner. Um, and I took a class and a half over the normal course limit. I was elected president of like CAS, which is like the biggest class of or the biggest school at NYU, and had like just a crazy ass GPA. Like I just worked really, really hard. And then I applied again to Cambridge my sophomore year. And everyone else in my life was like, Caroline, they've rejected you twice. You're literally a sophomore at NYU. Like, let it go. You gotta let this go. And so I applied the third time and got in. And I ended up keeping my apartment while I was at Cambridge by renting it out on Airbnb. This is now illegal in New York, but at the time it wasn't. When Airbnb was still a new thing and like there were very little laws around uh, sort of like person to person renting. So I had my home base in New York during all 3 years of my undergraduate degree at Cambridge. And then um, when I came back, or no, then after Cambridge, I spent a year living in Cambridge, continued renting out my apartment for income. And then I'd sold a book by that point, and then I moved back to New York.
Got it. And now you're
So I've lived in New York for it'll be 10 years in September, but to be totally fair, a lot of those years were spent just being a landlady in New York and living in
and
England.
not actually living here. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so your one of your claim to fame is this New York Mag article. So I just want to briefly mention it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've gone over it a million times in interviews.
I'm
But so
like,
you
what New York Mag article? I've
yeah.
never heard of it.
So your former best friend, social media ghostwriter, wrote this tell-all article in the New York Mag about you, and it was a very damning article, if I may say so myself. And I just want to know
Why did you think it was damning?
initially when you read it, how did it make you feel?
Oh, I was like, this bitch is evil.
Well, I'm wondering
It's
like
me. I'm that bitch. No, like I, I, I think it's smart to answer a question of like, how did the article make you feel? With like, well, how did it make you feel? But like, genuinely, like, what did you think? Why did you think it was so damning?
I mean, essentially I feel like she wrote about you that you kind of were careless and it was a transactional relationship between you two, and she kept kind of putting you first, and you didn't care at the end of the day. You were willing to kind of step on her. Is how I read it. And I'm wondering, when you read it, how did you feel? Did you feel like it was telling of your personality, or it was someone that was obviously like hurt by you?
You know, it's interesting that you see like the personal attacks as like what's most damning in that article. And this is what I was really trying to ask because what I see as most damning in that article, or what I there are two elements that I really hate. And the first one is that she really took credit for building my brand. She really sort of very effectively attacked me with these sexist stereotypes of like women who are extremely online, women who are pretty, women who are popular, women who have large Instagram followings, they can't also be smart. Like, even though I was literally getting an undergrad degree at Cambridge, it was very much like without me, she couldn't have built this. And I think a lot of people obviously don't understand the timeline because she did a really good job sort of zooming over this. Because when you say she was my ghostwriter, she was never my ghost writer. She was always only a co-writer. Like I've never submitted anything that she wrote that I didn't do 50% of. But I I see why New York Magazine pushed that angle because it was always my name on everything. Like it was never Caroline and Natalie. It was just Caroline Calloway, which I thought was fair because at the end of the day, like, you know,
It's your
I was the one.
audience. Yeah, it's your
Yeah,
audience that
I
are
mean,
coming to
Natalie
read this
never
stuff.
responded to comments. Natalie never made Snapchat stories. Natalie never just did a million billion little minutes of interacting with fans that added up to hours, that added up to days, that added up to years, that added up to a community. She was just there because, so what happened, and it's so interesting that did you know I was addicted to Adderall, or is this going to be like new information for you?
No, I did know that, and I wanna get into that. That I have a
Yes.
whole kind of
So with Natalie, like sort of like making my character seem awful, um when she told me she was going to write that article, she emailed me. I don't even know where to start to get into this story. So, first of all, I think it's really important to note that uh, I've gone viral 3 times in my life. Once for being a fairy tale when I was at Cambridge, deeply addicted to Adderall and just trying to make it as a writer. Again, and each one has been increasingly big. I think virality and viral fame, it very much is an exponentially compounding effect. So, like, each time builds on the time before. Second time I went viral was as a scammer. I launched these creativity workshops, which were
that people paid
very chaotic,
for.
very, what? That were what?
No, I was saying that people paid for, but then they never actually happened, correct?
No, no, not at all. No, the whole tour happened. Everyone who came to the events loved them. Everyone who was on Twitter who was never going to buy a ticket in the first place thought it was the stupidest, most overpriced thing in the world. 6 hours for $165 to hang out with this random white girl and sit on the floor and like plant wildflower seeds in mason jars. They were just like, make it make sense. And to make things worse, the first workshop happened the day that Hulu and Netflix launched their Fire Festival documentaries. So this comparison of like, this influencer is the one woman Fire Festival went absolutely viral. And to this day, if you go back, and the biggest thing I had going for me at that time, this is now the second time I've gone viral. Natalie's article doesn't exist yet. The biggest thing I had going for me was that I was not running a scam and that I had made a niche event for a niche community that everyone who was attending it really enjoyed. So I invited all these reporters to the events, which kept happening. And because I thought, at least they'll see that like everyone there is happy. And to this day, something I'm very proud of is that if you go back to January 2019 and like read the articles about me, yes, all the titles are "This woman is the one woman Fire Festival." But if you read the fucking articles, yes, they're quoting tweets that are like, "Lol, she ordered so many mason jars." Everyone they quoted at the event was like, "This is the best day of my life. Money well spent." And I just think it's such, I mean, I don't know. It is what it is. I'm not that fed up about it anymore, but it was very frustrating and confusing and traumatizing and disorienting to go through at the time. But, anyways, so I go viral for that. Meanwhile, in LA, Natalie reaches out to the Cut and she pitches them, like they were not contacting her, a tell all for $5,000, being like, let me tell you, like, just how bad she is. And this is where I think I need to explain my relationship with Natalie. I mentioned before that we were always co-writers, which I think is an important distinction. But I get why they use the term ghostwriter. It's juicier. It does have it, it I do think it's justified because her name wasn't on stuff, and so like I'm not really that riled up about that. But what really frustrates me in the way Natalie presented things is that we co-wrote captions for an audience of no one together. I started my Instagram career by buying 40,000 followers
Mhm.
and wrote these jokes with Natalie. They were even like not that long. But anyways, that was my, at the time, sophomore year at NYU. And then I transferred to Cambridge, and we basically fall out of touch for 3 years while alone I write the captions, the long fairy tale captions that actually ended up building my brand. Alone, I, for 3 years, build this community. I do all the interviews. I go through going viral as a fairy tale the first time. I build this thing and sort of like ripen this fruit for harvest in terms of like leveraging that audience that is now 500,000 real people plus 40,000 fake followers into a book deal. Unfortunately, in the process through all this, my mental health has just, I've always
Deteriorated.
struggled, deteriorated. My whole life I've struggled with suicidal depression that I inherited from my father. And at that time in my life, in my early 20s, I was self-medicating with amphetamine. I took it at first just to keep up with my studies. I mean, it was such a demanding workload during those 3 years at Cambridge. I was literally trying to build a brand on Instagram, you know, have friends, have a boyfriend, and get a degree from Cambridge. And I was doing it all while like not really like enjoying being alive at all. Like it was just like hard to get out of bed, as it has always been. But it got even harder as the pressures in my life increased so much more. And so I started taking Adderall to study, but I found that the euphoric upness of Adderall could actually be I want to choose my words carefully here because I don't want to sound like I'm endorsing this. Like, let me be clear. Do not self-medicate depression with Adderall. It will catch up to you, and although it seems it works at first, I those years ended up being so much darker because of the way I was just like at one point, my biggest problem with Adderall was that I did not know enough drug dealers in New York from whence to source it. Like when your problem is not that you're spending too much money on it. Like I had made the money with the book deal. Like I just couldn't get enough of this drug. I would stay up for 2-3 days at a time. Like I didn't even want to like be with anyone. I just wanted to be left alone with the feeling of that high. But so that's senior year. We're at this place where I'm not yet at a place where I'm running out of drug dealers to buy from, but I don't have enough money to support my Adderall addiction. And I've just found out that my dad has, although he's always sent me to private schools, it turns out that he's gone deeply into debt into doing this. And my money does not have $30,000 for Cambridge tuition for my senior year. And my dad, because this sounds like, it's like, why didn't he just tell you? My dad just wasn't communicative in this way, especially as he started to like deteriorate, which he was at this point, into a way where like you couldn't have normal conversations with him. He was just really paranoid, really, really all over the place. And so I find out that my family doesn't have money for tuition 1 month into school, my senior year. In like October, I literally just like get an email from the bursar's office that's like, hey, like, where's our $30,000? Like, you've been at school for a month. Like, very kindly pay tuition or not be at school.
What did
Like
you
pick
do?
one. So I called up Natalie and I was like, we need to fucking crank out this book proposal. Like, I'm dying. Like, I didn't say I'm dying, but I was like, I need your help. But I called her because I was dying. And so then we co-wrote this book proposal. Again, split it 50-50. I right down the middle, and we sold this book proposal for $500,000, and of which I got 100,000 upfront, and I gave 20 grand of that to Natalie. And Natalie does a very good job in her piece focusing on when we wrote those captions for the audience of 40,000 bots, zooming over the 3 years and then focusing the reader's attention on when we co-write this book proposal. So I think a lot of people find that article very damning because it's like, look, you didn't even build this thing. Someone else built it for you and you took credit. But on top of that, as Natalie would later come to find out, I was incredibly addicted to Adderall. In fact, what makes this story kind of complicated and her betrayal all that more fucked up is like she was the first she helped me call therapists. She was the first person who told me like this is an addiction. Like you have depression. Like I think it might run in your family. Like like stuff about your dad is really alarming. Like she 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 helped get me into therapy and had the first conversations in my life that were really frank about mental illness. But
Yet
to
that
go
none of
back
that was
to
mentioned in the article.
exactly, yeah. And so when she emailed me, so I go viral as for the second time in my life, this time as a fire festival scammer. Natalie pitches the cut. Over the next 6, 7, 8 months, she writes this incredibly long article and negotiates a price of $5,000. And a week before it comes out, she emails me to be like, just so you know, this is coming out in the cut. Like, I'm really glad like you're over your addiction. I'm so glad you've gotten help for your depression. Like, I'm so glad you're no longer addicted. Like she uses these addict, addiction, addicted, depression, mental health. And the email was like 2, 3 paragraphs long. If you've read the cut article, this is longer than almost any essay I've ever submitted for school. It's like 5,000 fucking words. It's a long ass essay. And in this essay, she does not once use the word
Mention any of those
addiction,
things.
addict, addicted, mental health, depression. And I don't think people realize what a fucking double standard this is until you think about what Natalie did and make the same comparison to a physical disease. If I wrote a personal essay, like, yes, I appreciate that maybe in the beginning of the story, she just wants to suggest it's an addiction. She wants to take the reader back to how she felt at the time and figure it out slowly. But there's no reveal, there's no figuring it out. There is just if I wrote an essay for New York Magazine, 5,000 words, and say I wrote it about the year before we knew my mom had cancer, which by the way, Natalie was great for. She was a great friend. Not that that part of our friendship makes it in the story at all, because I think it would be too humanizing for my character. And she really wanted to make me like a one-dimensional, vapid villain. But if I wrote an essay for New York Magazine about my mom's cancer and presented the symptoms of her physical illness, fatigue, exhaustion, if I presented them as character flaws like laziness or apathy towards her daughter, like disinterest in mothering, and then never at any point in the article used the name of the disease, cancer, like that would be unconscionable. They'd be like, you can't just do this. You have to like tell the
Yeah, you
reader
just skip
she had
over that.
cancer. But because mental illness is so stigmatized and more than anything invisible in our culture, and so under discussed and so taboo, no one blinked a fucking eye when Natalie just made me out to be, this really sexist stereotype of like spoiled, dumb, mean girl. And what makes it even crazier is Natalie grew up richer than I did. Like I've been to her house several times in New Haven. Parents both writers. Sister went to Brown, and she very much was born into the world that I worked like tooth and nail to lift myself up into with my education. So it was all very, very frustrating. Um, and that's my Natalie spiel. That's my Natalie. That's end scene.
Yeah, that's clearing up or your side of the story. Well, I'm glad you shared that. And I think you brought up a lot of points that I kind of want to dive into a little more deeply, starting with the Adderall addiction. Do you feel like, well, what made you first publicly even acknowledge the addiction as opposed to kind of dealing with it privately? I know your
Well,
whole persona is online, and we can get into that too.
I think I don't often like speak about this because honestly, most people don't. It never comes up. Most people forget this part of my life ever happened. But so when I was walking you through those last 10 years in New York, boarding school, gap year, NYU, Cambridge, another year in Cambridge, came back to New York. The year I spent after graduation in Cambridge was like rock bottom of my addiction. And it wasn't until like the following summer or so that I finally got clean. I got out of my book deal. I wish I could say I did it gracefully by like, you know, keeping everyone informed of my like deteriorating health and desire to get better. But I did it by telling lying to everyone, saying, "Oh, it's going really well. The book's going so well. It's going to be finished so soon." And then literally waking up one day and being like, "I sold a book I don't want to write. I'm not doing this." And that was the day I quit Adderall. And for the next two for the next couple of months I was very much online, but I would say, and this is again like I always feel like I have to be so careful drawing a line between discussing the truth of what has happened to me and like advocating others do what I'm doing. And like, this is very much like, don't try this at home. Like, this is just what the truth of what happened. I was basically just like drunk for the first 3 months of amphetamine sobriety. Like, I know that's not what people usually recommend for quitting a drug, is just do like replace it with a shit ton of another drug. But that is most certainly what I did. And after I stopped drinking so much, and because it took like 3 months for like the withdrawal feelings to like really stop. Like, do you know that sinking feeling you get when you get like a bad email where your heart just drops?
Yeah.
For me, amphetamine withdrawal felt like it, it's almost like that feeling before an actual feeling settles in, like, disappointment or guilt or sadness or like whatever this bad message is about to bring up for you. It truly felt like that falling, sinking, freewheeling feeling for just like 3 months. And I just felt like emotionally and psychologically, I just like couldn't land anywhere. I was just like, had this horrible sinking feeling. And so once that finally went away, then I stopped drinking so much and I spent the next 2 years offline. I since I've returned to the internet in 2019, I have been known to post I shit you not, maybe like 20 times a day. I went through a phase where I was just like, fuck it. Like, I need to call these fucking followers. Like, people don't like what I'm going to be doing online. Like, I need to get people who like aren't down for this like off the train, cuz like I don't want people being around just to like hate watch. So I was really trying to like call people who were like in it from people who were like, "Oh, this is not worth the trouble," you know? But I don't do that anymore. I'm much more selective about posting. But in comparison, I think over those 2 years, I maybe put up 15 grid posts.
In a
And
2-year span?
in a 2 year span, and the occasional story.
Do you feel like that had positive effects on your mental health? Being off? I went
You know,
offline for, let's see, 6 months. I had no phone, literally none. No access to internet, no, when I was in treatment. And it was just such a relief to wake up in the morning and feel like I'm not existing on these platforms. Like, I'm really just in the present, in my body, tangible, in person. I'm here. Nothing's going on while my phone is down.
do you mind if I ask you what you were in treatment for? Or it's okay if you don't want to say.
Just like having horrible, like debilitating anxiety. I was in a super toxic relationship, and just as that fully dwindled down, the only way I could really step out of it and step away was to go to treatment. And yeah, just being suicidal, such debilitating anxiety, like not eating, not sleeping, not functioning, not being able to make it to work, to do my emails, just like literally to the point where I was not a functioning person. So I actually chose to go. I had a lot of people close to me telling me like, "Oh, you don't really have to go to like a whole program. Just see your therapist." But I knew it's what I needed. And as someone who appeared really high functioning, um, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm really glad I went. But I took 5 to 6 months completely with no phone.
Wow.
And as someone who's
Wow.
also existed online for almost 10 years, it was the first time in my life I'd been off for that long. So I'm wondering, in your 2-year experience where you weren't online as much, what were the effects for you? Did you feel different?
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing sounds so beautiful and healthy, and I really identify with it more now that now sometimes I used to feel so weird about even taking like 2 days off from posting or like doing a story. Because my only experiences had been like doing it in Cambridge where I was just like destroying myself to like keep the engine moving of my brand online. And then my 2 years, honestly, when I didn't post, they were hell. I love posting online, and I think a big distinction. It might have been easier had someone just taken my phone away from me for 2 years, but I had the distinctly torturous experience of still being able to use my phone as a portal into everyone else's life online. And it was really, really hard for me when I was, because I was working through all this shame around my addiction, because you have to remember that like during these 2 years, this is before I've gone viral as a scam, this is before Natalie sold me out to the cut. At this point in time, the only record of me online is of like the luckiest girl in the world who has the best life ever. It was like 2015, 2016. Everyone's like, goals, 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 because that's what we said then. And so I just felt this. I didn't know how to be online. I felt this enormous shame about, like, lying to my friends, about being a bad friend, which, everything in Natalie's article is true. She doesn't tell any lies. The only way she lies is by omission, by leaving out, the full context of where that behavior was coming from. And honestly, the wonderful things she did as a friend to try to help me get into treatment and to take care of that disease. And also, but at the same time, who am I to throw the first stone? I literally sold a memoir to publishers where I didn't lie about going to Cambridge or going to balls. Like, I went, it happened. The only way I lied to them was by omission, by leaving out all the darkness. And Natalie did the same thing by leaving out all the good and all the humanness.
It was selective storytelling.
Yeah, so I really like don't. It sucks. I'm very glad that the worst things I ever did to hurt her, I did high as balls on amphetamine. And it's easier to be at peace being so happy with the person that I've become, my kindness, my gentleness, my honesty. That's like, knowing these things about myself is like really what's given me the resilience to like make such an effective comeback from being absolutely fucking dragged through the mud. And like, Natalie, she was really wonderful to me when I was going through it, but like she grew up to be like sort of a bitter person. And like that's I don't know, maybe she'll work through it. Maybe in the same way that like 5 years after I sold a selective version of events for the maximum amount of money possible, she will look back on it with the same clarity that I have. And, maybe a new chapter will start. But until then, like, whatever. I don't, but, the 2 years was hard when I had my phone, because I felt like all my friends who had been online with me they were growing, they were surpassing me. I felt like I was being left behind.
Yeah, do you feel
And
that constant kind of keeping up?
not
I imagine, and I definitely felt this when I had to leave my phone behind, of like, are people going to forget about me? Am I
Yeah, that's
forgettable?
exactly what
And
I was
if I'm
thinking.
not feeding the machine, to use your own
Yeah.
words, and keeping up with this persona, this identity
Also,
online.
a little iced coffee ASMR for the pod.
Yeah, I mean, do you worry about that even still? Can you hear me?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, no, I was just taking a sip of iced coffee. I do not worry about that. I really think that one of the ways that just, just doing a little drugs on the pod, my new upper of choice caffeine. I don't I don't worry about that as much anymore, but only because I've been through absolute fire when it comes to staying relevant online. Like when I went viral as a scammer, as like the One Woman Fire Festival, I it was then that I learned that you cannot fight the currents of virality. Like it's really like surviving going viral in a bad way. Same rules as surviving a riptide. If you try
Wait,
to
I
fight the
love this
current,
quote of yours.
yeah, you'll expend all your energy too soon, too quick, and drown. You need to let it carry you in the direction it's going, and when the current subsides, swim back safely to shore. And that is not what I did the first time. I was like, I had tried apologizing. I tried refunding. Oh, do you know what's so fucking crazy? Not only did the events continue, I did the rest of the tour for free and lost like $10,000. If anything, I scammed myself. Like, I literally just like, because I felt so worthless and I felt so bad and I felt like I had nothing to offer. And the later events I ended up charging tickets, but for the first ones I literally like gave everyone their money back and was like, pay what you want. Like, I just, if you feel scammed, I'm so sorry. And like so many people sent their money back to be like, no, I had the best day ever. But anyways, I don't worry about being forgotten now, because when Natalie's thing came out, when I got that email from her being like, just so you know, next week this piece is coming, glad you are no longer an addict. And she did not say, by the way, I will be erasing that addiction from the record in 1 week's time. But I after I got that email, all I wanted to do, I all I wanted to do was just, go to sleep for the next 6 months until this whole thing would have
Blew
blown
over.
over. But yeah, but I knew, and yeah, until the whole thing had blown over, I knew that the only way that I could really like learn my lesson from the first time I went viral is if I just, followed my own goddamn advice and like swam in the direction this wave was carrying me. I think, it's so funny how often people talk about like Natalie's highly anticipated article for the cut, everyone waiting for it on Twitter. It makes me sort of like smile in a bittersweet way, because they talk about that hype as if it's Natalie's accomplishment or New York Magazine's accomplishment. It is not. No, no. New York Magazine does not announce articles beforehand. Natalie had no presence online from which to talk about this article. I promoted the fucking shit out of this article, and every single day I cleared all other topics from my channel. Like I just became a Natalie article countdown account, because I knew that I needed to hype this. And, it is a beautifully written article. It's not particularly ethical, but it's very tightly worded. And, it's extremely compelling. Like, by making me the bigger villain she made me, the more enticed she makes a reader. I mean, we see it in superhero movies all the time. People like clear cut ideas of good and bad, and they don't it takes a lot of brain power to grapple with the complexity of real human people. Um, Whereas it's very easy to consume simple stories of good and bad. And I really leaned into that scammer title, and having gone through that, I now really feel like, you know what, like anything that happened to me, like I'd be
Handle
able to
it.
figure it out. Yeah, and there's a great saying that, like a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. Like, you don't know how to really sail until you've been in rough oceans. And so at this point, I really don't worry about being forgotten at all, because I'm like, I'm I don't know the right sailing term for this. I'm a black belt karate jiu-jitsu sailing master. A lot of mixed metaphors in this sentence, but yeah, I just feel like, yeah, that's one skill I probably have
You can put it at the top of
Gotcha.
your resume.
Yeah, I'm just, like, good at playing the internet like a fucking church organ. That's the whole resume.
Do you have any
Do you know something
advice?
funny? Oh,
Oh,
no,
I
no.
I
I
wanted to
I was just
oh, you go.
no, 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 I was gonna make a joke about how I've never had a resume actually, because 'cause I've just always been professionally Caroline Calloway, but that's a very quick joke, and now you can ask me about advice.
Okay. I wanted to know if you had any advice for someone who's listening who has dealt with or is dealing with kind of internet trolls. You know, you can talk about how you can manage the waves, but how do you do that? Or what would you say to someone who's maybe not managing it as well?
I would say it's important to remember that everyone has them. I think it's really easy to feel alone in your trolling because trolling is often so hyper specific. It's a really specific thing that you've said or done or worn or just whatever that they're picking apart. So it feels really like you specific, but something that's been really peaceful for me to realize is I really used to walk around with this mentality that like I got trolled so much worse than other people. And I don't think it's a binary. I don't think it's like either that's true or we're all the same. I do think I get trolled a little bit more than most people. I mean, like show me show me a Reddit page as obsessed with someone as D-list famous as I am, and like I will Venmo you $5 because it's a lot for someone who's not that I'm not that famous yet. But I would say as I've met more famous people, like actual famous people over like the past year, it's been so fucking comforting for me to just have these private conversations behind the scenes where like they're literally just as bothered by it. It's sometimes even more than I am. And like everyone's getting it, even people who you think are like fucking perfect. So that would be the first thing. I would say remember everyone's getting it. And then I'd also say um just remember that these people are fucking sick. Like it's really like if I ever found out that one of my good friends in real life, if I like found out that they'd been sending like strangers on the internet, like people they do not know, abusive messages, I would remove that person from my life. I'd be like, oh my God, you're a psychopath. Like, you're literally so fucking weird. Like, what? Like, anyone who you'd actually want advice from, any of your accomplished, thriving, successful friends, they're not doing that. And I want my feedback from those people and also people who actually have like fucking met me and like fucking know me.
Of
But
course.
so
I
I would say remember that those people are sick and remember even the gods among us get trolled.
Well, do you think the issue is that those people are sick or that it's so removed that they can say it behind screens, they don't have to say it to your face, and so it's more of a cultural component of, like, the times that
It's
we're living in?
it's for sure both. I mean like like even in art history like this is the thumbnail, it's just like me with one strand of hair. Even in art history, people have always been meaner behind a paintbrush, behind a pen, whether it's like political caricatures or when print was invented, writing scathing things about other people. That distance has always psychologically emboldened uh, creators of criticism, but I do think I do think that the comparison between, people who earned a living being, say, writing uh, social commentary cartoons for like popular 20th century like mainstream magazines, to compare someone who's been able to like carve out a livelihood of being a critic and to compare them to someone who literally like creates hundreds and hundreds of fake accounts to like keep coming back to one person to just privately send them one message. This is not in order to build them a career, this is coming at the detriment to their ability to like have their own friends, live their own life, go on their own dates, make their own money, have their own job. Like, and that is what I say is like a sickness or like, and I do think that we should be like, I think it's kind to call, I think, you know, I could trivialize and be like, they're obsessed with me. But I think these people are truly like sick and need serious
Help.
help. As and there's nothing wrong with that. I have also I used to go to therapy 3 times a week. I go twice now, but like I'm very open to having to go back to 3 times a week or 4 times a week. Like I've made peace with the fact that I have a brain that skews towards suicide. And I, you know, a lot of people consider therapy a luxury, but if I were born with a faulty kidney, I wouldn't blink twice at the idea of paying for weekly or monthly dialysis or whatever I needed to like keep that organ functioning at tip top condition. But but yeah, I to answer your question, I think it's both and. It's screens embolden people, distance emboldens people, not having to actually hurt people emboldens people. And when you really get into the people who are like on those Reddit threads on the daily, that is like a kind of sickness.
So I have dealt with some really wild trolling,
Oh my god, let's compare
cyberbullying,
troll stories. But also,
cyber
let me
stalking
get
stories. Are
oh
you
my
going?
god,
Do you have
tell
to go to the
me.
bathroom?
No, 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 I don't. I'm just getting my laptop charger, but this will be a perfect chance for you to tell me your crazy cyber story.
Let's see. One of the craziest ones. I had someone make over 200 accounts in a 6-month span that got increasingly more threatening. And every time I would block them, they would just make another account. To the point where they were sending me my address saying I was going to get murdered. Um,
Wow.
like sending
Yeah, my
they then made the whole account actually followed everyone I followed. So then people would look at this spewing kind of false information about me, and they said that they were actually a real friend of mine in real life, but they weren't. It actually
oh,
happened to be
I've
some
gotten all.
random basement dweller.
How did you find out that it was a random basement dweller? Besides the fact that obviously it was.
This
Like
is probably
obviously.
this has got to be back in like 2016, 2015, where I feel like laws just weren't
Mm.
keeping up with the times, you know?
And
So
I still don't think they're keeping up with the times.
I did go to the police, just because I was getting threats, and it
Hmm.
took like 4 to 5 months for Facebook, who owns Instagram, to give up the IP address of the person. I never pressed charges. I just wanted to know who it was and if I was safe. And yeah, it was some random girl who lived in a state many states away from where I lived.
I I relate to everything you're fucking saying. I would say like once every 2 years, the Reddit will like dox my address. Um, so Reddit thankfully has like good on that site for really cracking down on doing that. I think they like I think they just like can tell now when posts contain an address because my team has always like gotten it taken down quite
Quickly.
quickly. Um, and yeah, and we have a contact there now who like we can contact about keeping me safe because it's like such a problem. But in terms of, I get messages all the time being like, I know you in real life. You think I'm your friend, but I'm not, and I think this and this and this about you. Messages also like, I'm watching you right now. Like I see you out. And the only reason I know that these are like not true is because occasionally I'll get them in places where I'm definitely not. But sometimes like I mean I don't like really travel in that far of a radius from the West Village. So when people are like, I see you in the West Village, like
Like alarm bells go
it's
off.
yeah, it's like it's I know it's not true, but like it also doesn't feel great to get that message. It doesn't feel awesome. Of people, I've definitely gotten death threats. I think a lot of people, once I came out, maybe that's not the right word, although in our culture, which so stigmatizes mental health, it almost feels it almost feels like a big reveal of some sort that's taboo. But once I revealed to people that I was had struggled with suicidal depression, and that my dad had killed himself with an overdose of painkillers.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
I get a lot of death threats that are not like, I'm gonna kill you, but it's like, your dad killed himself because he was so ashamed of you, or like, you should, good thing you have depression, like, I hope you kill yourself and rid the world of you. And then the craziest thing my community has ever done, and I never went to the police. I don't even know, it's actually really inspiring that you went to the police. Tell me if you think that there are any laws being broken here that like you think I could do something about. But they so after the one really crazy one was they when after my dad's death is the Reddit community kept sending me messages that he was still alive. They're like, I just talked to him on the phone, he's not dead. That was
See,
crazy.
that's
And then
deranged. That's kind of
I
what
and then
my stalker person would do, because my mom passed away when I was young, and they
no
found
way.
photos of her, and
No.
they would send them to me in the
Oh my
DM to,
god.
like, get my attention so I would read their messages, and I remember just, like, the feeling you described earlier of, like, getting a bad email, just, like, such
Yeah,
a physical
totally.
feeling when I would read this stuff.
Such a physical thing. Um, After that fall, after Natalie's article came out, really like that winter, they contacted me trying to be, claiming to be a mutual friend between me and my boyfriend from the fairy tale era, like the guy that I dated for those 3 years at Cambridge that I like built the fairy tale chapter of my life upon. That relationship, they claimed to be a mutual friend. They like found, I don't know how they did it because I haven't thought about it too much, but I guess the only way they could find out is if they knew someone in London who like knows that we both know this person, or maybe like I haven't accepted new friend requests on Facebook in fucking years. But anyways, they found someone that I know and his new girlfriend who knows me better, and they contacted me being that person, just from like a burner, or no, they contacted me being a person that that person had told, and they didn't want to reveal their identity, but they wanted me to know that my ex-boyfriend had terminal leukemia and had a few months to live,
Is this even was this
and that
true or no?
stay with me,
Okay.
and then he has a few months to live, and they just thought that I should know. I spend the next 3 months sobbing. Like, he and I have blocked each other on everything, although his mom and I are still really good friends. Like, I lived with them in at their house in Sweden for a summer, and she loves to garden. I love flowers are my personality. Me and Pernilla fucking hit it off. So I oh, can you bleep out her name, by the way? Sorry, I shouldn't have said her first name just
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
That was careless. Um but because she's not a public person at all. But I wrote like an 8-page handwritten letter because I had never gotten to apologize to Oscar for the ways that I hurt him during my addiction. Um I I just thought I'd have like more time to do that. Unlike Natalie, who was like the first person I contacted to like during those 2 years when I was offline to like make amends and really catalog like all the things I'd done wrong as an addict. Oscar was like really the last person in my life that I still had to reach out to. So I wrote him this long letter, just like really like listing the ways that I hurt him and was sorry, and just like since my dad had died, just like talking about death, and and just trying to be there for him. And I sent this to his mom, and it turns out, but before I sent this, they also reached out to me as his doctor, because I posted on my story being like, does anyone know my ex? Does he actually fucking have leukemia? Like, I posted something really sarcastic like that, and they contacted me from a account with like 300 followers, so like just real enough to be legit. That was, and this is what really got me. They spelled doctor the correct Swedish way with a K instead of the C, and like was like, and he sent me this long message being like, I'm his primary care physician in Sweden where he's getting his end of life treatment. Like, you should take this down. This is so disrespectful to his family. And I was like, oh my God, I got to take this down
Okay, but
immediately. Holy
Caroline,
fucking
what
shit.
about HIPAA?
Yeah, I know in retrospect, but like yeah, I mean, I should have known, but I just thought I was just HIPAA was the least of my concerns
Yeah,
because
you were.
it's not like he told me what he had. He was just like, I'm the primary care physician. Like, this is so offensive to the family. Like, please take this down for their privacy. Like, it was just enough of him like advocating for privacy. And it was such the threat of Oscar only having again, fucking bleep his name, I'm so fucking dumb, only having a few months to live was so blinding and all encompassing that I just didn't. And that combined with the name dropping of the mutual friend and like this very plausible story that it was like a friend of this friend who like wanted me to know but didn't want to tell me myself because they didn't want to get in the middle of anything. Anyways, you probably already know where this is going. Oscar did not have leukemia. It was just a way for me to spend 3 months of my life crying, which they very successfully pulled off, and embarrassed myself by sending him a long letter thinking that he was dying.
I want
So
to know what
yeah.
your opinion is on people who are listening to this podcast that are listening to both of us talk about kind of our experiences getting trolled, and people who view us as more one-dimensional, like privileged white women who gives a fuck if they get trolled. Like when the humanity exits the chat and it's like, wait, at the end of the
Yeah.
day, we're people too, and we have emotions and feelings, and it's painful getting
Yeah, I think it's just
getting those messages.
I would feel bad for those people because we are privileged, and we're also both women. Men are more privileged than us. White men are not as privileged as the richest white men in the world, like Elon Musk, are the most powerful ones. And I think there's always, until you get to the very top of the pyramid, there are going to be people who have it better than you. But I don't think just because they're people who have it better off than me for the body that they were born into, the family they were born into, the world that they're born into, I still wouldn't wish this trolling on them. Like, I don't see that as an excuse. Like, if I can look at people with more privilege than me and not wish ill on them or like think that like they deserve it, I think it throws into pretty harsh relief how fucked up it is for anyone to look at us and be like, oh, they deserve it. Like, no,
Yeah.
no, get a soul, grow up. That's a toxic way to look at the world.
Do you feel like reading any of that stuff and having gone viral multiple times and experienced all your the spectrum of getting trolled, do you ever start to believe what people are telling you? Kind of the idea of like, if everyone thinks you're an asshole, you start believing you're an asshole.
Yeah, I often say this, that it was very hard to hold on to the idea of myself as good when the whole world thought I was bad. And I've never found a better way to express that concept than that single sentence. And it was really hard. The 2 points that were the hardest was when I was at, I think some of the people who have been obsessed with me the longest, before there was a Reddit about me, there was a private Facebook group that was like a spin-off of this little like celebrity gossip blog called Who Weekly. And they just made like a private Facebook group just like picking apart every single thing about me.
Do you read
And I
these
still
often?
no, I'm telling you the 2 worst moments of my
Yeah.
life with in terms of letting the trolling get to me.
Mm-hmm.
The Oscar thing, I wouldn't consider it like I let it got to me. I would say that I was optimistic about I was too optimistic about what lengths were out of bounds of what you know sick people would do. But in terms of when it got to me, it was the first time I discovered this Facebook group. This was like during the fairy tale days at Cambridge. It absolutely wrecked me to go from thinking that there were just like some people who didn't like my account or would leave an occasional mean comment to realize that there was a organized group of people who every time I did anything, were going to be there to pick it apart, whether it was just, anything, what I was reading, what I was wearing, what my face looked like, what my hair looked like, what I said, what I misspelled, what font color I chose, anything. That absolutely wrecked me. I was like literally incapacitated for like 1 week with grief. And that was really bad. And I really tended to believe them. And then the next big jump, was when I went viral as like the Fire Festival scam, because that was also a big jump, because I went from literally like never having gone viral in a bad way to like I woke up the next day in a world that was comparing me to criminals. And that was even worse. That made me look back on the Facebook group thing and be like, well, damn, you thought that was bad? Wow. And that, I really, like, for the first week of that onslaught of going viral as a scammer, I absolutely believed it, especially because it was coming from, I mean, I was going out of my goddamn mind. Like, I literally, like, friends were taking turns staying on the phone with me until I fell asleep because it was just so rough.
Did
Because
you
especially because I used to, I sort of have a better relationship with journalists now, but before I went viral as a Fire Festival criminal, I love journalists. Like, I was like, these are my people, my fellow writers, artistes, like, and then they did all this sort of like very it reading those articles where the title's trashing me, the tone of the article is trashing me, but all the like quotes from the people at the event are like positive. It really made me see like how
warped?
it warped, but also just like click driven, like journalism can be. Like, it's not always as much of a writing based art form that I had held it up to be in my mind. So but it was also really hard because I had sort of cherished journalism until then, and to like see myself in the news, these places that I'd like, this source of information that I'd once trusted. Yeah, that was really hard. And basically what I'm trying to say is that like I yes, I have believed it, but I think it's easiest to believe it when you go from uh, periods of like when you do like a big jump in the volume of trolling that you're getting. Like, the day I went from thinking there was no community talking about me in a Facebook group to like
To
reading that
discovering that there
Facebook
was,
group,
yeah.
heartbreaking. And then again, the jump from like going viral as a Fire Festival
Have you ever
thing was
experienced
big.
any adrenaline and thinking like have you ever had a moment where you're like, holy shit, why did these people care? Or like, why are they so obsessed with me?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all the time. Just the other day, I took my fucking cat to a farm to pick tulips. Today, literally, I woke up to messages of people trying to cancel me because tulips are toxic to cats. And I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ. Lots of farmers have cats. There were cats running around this goddamn tulip farm. Like, shockingly, cats know, like many animals out there, know not to eat what is poisonous to them. And it's just, yeah, it does get me going. It's like, can't you just like fucking let me live? But I actually have to go. So maybe like one more question.
Okay, cool.
And
Okay.
then,
And then we're good. Okay, do you think
yes,
of yourself as famous?
absolutely. But not as famous as I'd like to be.
But like I wonder, so when I think about you, I think of this like fame in a certain niche online, like maybe someone just walking down the street, or if I were talking to my dad, they wouldn't have heard of you, but obviously a certain group of people are so obsessed with you, create these groups online, on Reddit, and all of these places. I can imagine that that can almost fragment someone's identity, and like where do you lay between that? Like, who is the real Caroline Calloway? We'll end on that.
I mean, the real Caroline Calloway is obviously me living my life. And I know I share more than 99% of everyone else online, but that does not mean that I'm sharing 100% of what happens to me. Like, there are lots of, I have a rule for myself that I don't share about anything that I'm not fully healed from. And so there are lots of things that I privately process with my therapist, with my friends, with my mom, my grandma. And like that's very much the real Caroline Calloway. But I also think through many years of trial and error, I now I used to try to make my online persona the person I wanted to be, and now I really try to make my online persona ever catching up to the like person that I'm changing into and evolving into, which, you know, for everyone is dynamic and shifting all the time, with that one caveat of like if I'm not privately healed from it, then I'm not, you know, it's not compulsory to share it. And in terms of like, you know, you think of me being like niche famous, I really don't think of the Reddit as like having anything to do with my fame. I think of myself as famous as like, where do you live?
In New York.
In New York?
Mhm.
Oh my God, we should hang out. I think of myself as being like very New York coastal elite famous, which if I had to choose one area of the world to be famous in, it would absolutely be that again and again. And I think what I'd like to become more of is sort of like a cultural, I when I say that I think I'm famous, I think people say my name and they mean something very specific. They mean Cambridge, they mean scammer, they mean online persona, they mean turquoise and flowers and like chaos. And I think that's what I mean when I say I'm famous, not the Reddit thing. And
No,
I
of course,
think
and
it isn't.
I didn't mean just the Reddit group. I just mean that maybe walking down the street, it's not like an Angelina Jolie, you know? It's not that
No.
level,
Oh,
that
no, I
volume.
wish. I wish. I wish. No, it's not like that at all. I only get recognized like maybe once every other day. And only in New York. It did not happen to me fucking once in Florida.
Sorry, the video is like lagging. Oh, let me
Oh,
see.
no worries.
Okay, do you have any like kind of last questions or do you feel good with that?
I feel great with this. No more last questions. Let's say goodbye. My assistants are ready to work and being very quiet in the corner, which I feel very bad about. So I need to go talk to them and go scam some unsuspecting innocents and not get caught.